This is American Hope Talk Radio with your host, W.L. Laney. His guests are real people who have overcome real obstacles and are willing to share their experiences with you, bringing hope for the challenges standing in the way of your greater success. Listen while we deal with life as it is today and reveal how hope for the future can bring you more success than you have ever imagined. Now let's get on with today's show.
You're listening to American Hope Talk Radio. I'm your host, W.L. Laney. My guest is the award-winning author and fellow Irishman, Michael K. Reynolds. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Hey, I'm excited about being here.
So, what's it like to be Irish?
Well, you know, when you're a redheaded guy with freckles, pretty much from the first time that a little old grandmother reaches into the shopping cart basket and runs her fingers through your hair, you know that you're Irish. And so even growing up here in America, I always considered myself 100% Irish, although that's not exactly the case.
Well, it's not the case for me either. However, do you know what I would be if I were not Irish?
No.
Ashamed. When I was growing up, I lived in an abusive alcoholics home with half brothers and lots of abuse and et cetera, et cetera. So I really latched on to my Irish heritage long before I had any idea what it was about, what it meant to be Irish or anything else. And truth be known, I probably don't have near as much Irish blood as I wish I did, just because of intermarriage with, you know, the Scotch and the Welsh and the English and all of that was going on.
Well, I've found that people in this books, the series of books, that it seems like they only need to be about 2% Irish, and they claim full blood. There seems to be a real acknowledgement of that. But I also know too, when I went to Scotland, I found out that they do have the highest percentage of redheads in the world. So you got some other good blood in there too.
That's very, very true. So Michael, tell us about your current trilogy of books that you're working on.
Yes, it's the Heirs of Ireland series, and the first book, Flight of the Earls, came out in January, and that documents the Great Potato Famine in the 1840s. And a few people know this, but they had a population of about 8 million during that time in the 1840s, and 2 million of their people either emigrated or died. And so 25% of their population was decimated within really just a few years. And so Flight of the Earls covers that story. It's a fictional tale with adventure and romance and suspense, but with a lot of history too. And that covers that immigration to New York City. And the second book, In Golden Splendor, carries on that story of the family through the gold rush in 1849 era in the old American West. And then the third book, which comes out in January, covers the Civil War. So it brings the story to a conclusion. But in my research, it's just a fascinating time in American history where 150 years back, they were struggling with a huge debt to the nation, huge financial debt. They were arguing about huge immigration problems, and it was a divided nation. So does it sound familiar at all to what we're going to do today?
That's just what I was going to say. That sounds pretty familiar. In your book, or books rather, are you bringing some what you believe to be answers for where we are today?
Well, I think, you know, what's interesting is I wrote historical fiction that with the idea being that I would go back to a different time. It would be a simpler time. There wouldn't be all the complexities of the things that we have going on in this time period. And as I did my research in historic New York City, which was just burgeoning at that time, it was through its kind of adolescence. Here you've got problems of rampant prostitution. It was estimated 80 to 90% of the men attended brothels, and those are including the married ones. All kinds of social issues, all kinds of other kinds of issues. And so through that process, what I discovered is that the problems, are very much similar to what we're dealing with today, and the solution has been the same. And I think a lot of that, when we look at all the issues and challenges that we have today, and they seem so insurmountable, that really the more crazy it is, the more that we're really pointed to God and to our relationship with God. And I've written these books for all audiences, but there's no doubt that that's kind of a consistent theme, is that the answer 150 years ago or 2,000 years ago was the same as it is today.
Okay, so Michael, how do we deal with spiritual principles without sounding religious, or without getting just cut off because that's too religious for me?
Well, that was really that was really the goals with these novels. In the old days, which wasn't all that long ago, most of classic literature involved talking about spirituality and faith. In fact, our great movies that you've had in the 40s and the 50s, some of the real classics talked a lot about that. It was just the way it is. And then somehow in the last 10 or 20 years, it became taboo to be able to bring your faith into your writing. I personally believe that every author brings their faith into their writing, and they talk about their faith. It's just that some people, they believe in different things. And so, one of the challenges that I have, I think, as an author, and I think it's shared with a lot of other fellow authors who write in the Christian area of writing, is that if you go into your large bookseller, you'll see that our books are in a shelf far in the back off to the right corner. With the books that I wrote, I was really tempted to write them for a general audience and to have them on the general bookshelves. But I think that is the challenge today. It's not so much that what we're writing is different than what the classics were, or what great movies were with action and adventure and great dialogue, albeit without the graphic images and violence and sex that seems to be so part of what it is today. It was still great films, and it was still great books. And so I think as authors, at least, I think a lot of Christian authors, they make a choice of whether they want to write books that are very specific to a Christian audience, and I think there's a lot of great books that fit that category. But there is a group, I think, of us who want to write books that hopefully are page-turning, exciting, full of adventure, romance, but told through a Christian worldview. And that's what I get excited about. I've been able to do talks. I've been invited to do talks in my Rotary clubs all throughout my area and through a very secular audience. And it's been really gratifying to have people that traditionally would never read Christian fiction come up and say how much they enjoyed the stories and not take offense to the fact that there are those themes throughout the books. And that's exciting to me as an author.
If you are correct, if the Christian principles are the solution to the challenges that we're facing in our nation today, why do you feel that Christianity seems to be on the decline, certainly out of favor with the general population?
Well, I think in many ways in America we've been spoiled to get this concept that we're in the majority, and that the way we think and feel is the way that most people feel. But having done a fair amount of travel and looking at things on a global level, in a lot of ways our voices are in the minority. And I also think that I think the Bible teaches pretty clearly too as well that we're going to be hated if we love Christ, and that I don't think there's anything in there that says we'll be in the majority, we'll win all the elections, we'll get all the results that we want to do. And so I think the main thing that we're asked to do is, regardless of whether it's one person talking to 500 that disagree, or 200 talking to 200 that agree is that we're just to speak the truth and we're to do it with love and leave the counting and the numbers to God.
Our pastor this past Sunday, he's going through a series of messages taken from the Sermon on the Mount, and this past week he was dealing with the passage that says, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." And he made quite the point that particularly the fundamental or evangelical Christian crowd is known more for judging people than they are for bringing a message of hope. Do you have anything that you feel about that?
Well, I think probably one of the biggest roots of our challenges as Christians, which I think in many ways makes us ineffective in our role as evangelists. And we're all called to be evangelists. Some of us are better at it than others, but we're still all called to do that. But I've discovered that there's one word that just seems to cripple Christians, and that's the word hypocrite. And people say, well, all Christians are hypocrites, and then the wrong response to that is to go, no, we're not. We believe what we act the way we believe. The truth is, we're all hypocrites, and we're all fall short. And I think the answer is humility. I mean, that's the power of our ability to share the message, is we do it through humility, and not that we're better, but that we're different. Not that we've earned anything, but we've been blessed. And I think when we try to share the message through arrogance or through bullying, it backfires. And so the most effective people in my life, when I look at those people when I wasn't walking with the Lord and I was really wandering out in the bushes, when I look back at those people that had a profound, dramatic impact on my walk, they were very humble, and they spoke, with meekness, but with the power in their meekness. And I think that's how we have to. I think that's how we have to share the message, is with that sense of humility, that we're as fallen as anybody else. It's just we've been saved.
Do you think that the problem for a lot of people is that it isn't so much that they're hypocrites, but rather that they're trying to display their best side, and they've got too many struggles going on with the dark side?
Well, truthfully, I mean, we're in a battle daily with the flesh, and any of us who I think try to make a message that we've arrived, or that we've come to a certain place where we're perfected. I think that's when we really look like a hypocrite. I think when we're able to say, gosh, there are so many struggles and challenges that we have, and that I have daily, but this is how I've resolved it, and I've resolved it in a different way. I think people are very open to that, and that's part of these books, kind of a continual message through all three of the novels, is because the characters go through huge ordeals and tasks and insurmountable odds. But it's that idea that they're not perfect, but that they have the opportunity to be forgiven. And I think that's the message that it's just accepted a lot better to people. If we say, hey, I'm not perfect, I've got a lot of flaws, but this is what changed my life.
Okay. Our show is American Hope Talk Radio. So we want to be able to provide hope to people. And in line with what you are just saying, I think it really helps people when they understand that they're talking to a real person. And so I encourage people to really open up and share whatever obstacles that they've had to overcome, so that the audience understands, hey, this person is real, this person has lived where I live, he's overcome the same obstacles that I'm facing, I can find hope in that. Do you have something that you can share that would say, hey, I'm a real person?
You mean me personally?
Personally. You personally.
Oh.
I bare my soul all the time, Michael, so...
I've made so many mistakes. I've bumped into so many walls. What's interesting is that this series I came up with in college. I had already written 3 books by the time I was 20, and I was going through college, and all I had was the title "Flight of the Earls," which is the first book, and that it was going to be set in Ireland in the 1840s. And it took 20 years, a 20-year detour that I went through before I really felt God leading me to a place to where I was ready to start writing novels again. And as I look back on it, 20 years in the past, when I was in college, I didn't like people. I was useless around women, and I wasn't walking with the Lord. And so when you look back on that journey, and you would think, back then I would say you're going to have to wait 20 years until this book gets published. I would have never believed that or agreed to it. But when I look back 20 years later and see how God gave me an amazing woman for a wife, He gave me 3 daughters, and combined gave me extensive training on how wonderful women are, and a much deeper and profound appreciation and understanding of them. And then additionally, I had to go through 20 years to really learn about Him, and with a lot of tripping and falling, and the truth being told, I would not have liked what I would have written 20 years ago. And so I'm just so thankful to God that he provided that detour, and allowed me to write these books when I felt like I was at a place where I was ready to write something that would honor Him.
Okay, so how long did it take to write the first book when you started writing?
Well, with every book, it takes all of your life. You put everything, all of your
So
experiences.
you're cheating me out of my next question, because I wanted to make the point that if it took a year to write the book, it was really 21 years, because it was 20 years of experience and knowledge and growing and learning that allowed you to then sit down and write the actual book.
I think if I was to try to define how long it took if I was actually focused on it and writing, it was probably about a year to write that first book. And a lot of people, there's a kind of an inside secret to novels and authors, is usually the second book an author writes is their worst. And the reason is they usually have their whole lifetime to write that first. They get a contract, and then they're on a deadline. So one of my goals that I had set out for was to hopefully make the second book even better than the first. But it's interesting, a lot with that first book. You really do learn a lot about the people who write them, because that is one that people typically have a lot of time to think through and think about and kind of define themselves.
How different is the second and third book? Because a lot of people, they only have one book.
Yeah.
Even though they write 3 or 4, they really only have one.
Well, and that was really a blessing. I was only going to, I only pitched one book, but in the industry, it costs so much for them to launch a debut novelist through a traditional publisher, that they have such a large investment that usually they're the ones that want to do a 3-book contract, so that if they're going to invest in the author, that by the second book and the third book. I'd have to say that I just completed the third novel, which comes out in January.
Okay, Michael, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're just almost out of time, and I want to have time for you to give your contact information so that people can get a hold of you and buy the book. Would you share that with us, please?
Sure. It's available at just about all the bookstores, and on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles. It's the book that just came out is In Golden Splendor. And you can also go to my website, michaelkreynolds.com. And there I have a blog called Real Life, Real God, and would love to have you subscribe for that too as well.
Okay, so that's www.michaelkreynolds.com. michaelkreynolds.com. If you didn't get it written down, you can always call our office toll free at 855-WL Laney. That's 855-955-2639. Michael, thank you so much for being with us today, and good luck on the sale of your books and all the other things that you're doing. I apologize we didn't have time to talk about them all, because there's some other great things I wanted to talk about. Your blog, Real Life, Real God. Michael, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks so much.
You have been listening to American Hope Talk Radio with W.L. Laney. Questions and comments can be emailed to wl@wllaney.com. Go to www.wllaney.com for more programs like the one you heard today.